My intermission guests tonight on Concert Night with the Dayton Philharmonic are our guest composer, Michael Daugherty, and our guest soloist, DJ Sparr, who you just heard performing Michael's electric guitar concerto called G's Bend. Welcome, Michael, and welcome, DJ.
Hello, thanks for having us.
So let's start off with how this piece came to be. So let's start with Michael. Um, you're writing an electric guitar concerto, and you end up writing an electric guitar concerto about this little hamlet in Alabama that's known for its quilts. How does that happen?
Uh, well, I saw an exhibit of the quilts in a museum, and I'm a huge fan of color and patterns and artwork. And I just thought the story behind these African American women who lived in isolation in Alabama throughout the early 20th century onward, and they developed this interesting way of making quilts using scraps and coming up with interesting designs. I just thought it would be an interesting subject matter.
And then the commission for it came from the Alabama Symphony. So was did it start with the fact that it's an Alabama orchestra that's approaching you and here's an Alabama subject, or was Gee's Bend something that was percolating in your mind all along, and when the Alabama Symphony came on, it's like, yeah, that's the idea for this
Sure.
commission.
Well, I think it really moved forward when Alabama asked me to write a piece, and they wanted something that was rock and roll influenced. So yeah, I put it together. Because Gee's Bend is in Alabama. It's actually right on the border between Alabama and Mississippi. Yeah, that was a connection, and I wanted to have something that would have some kind of meaning to uh, people who lived lived there. So it was a perfect event to write this piece.
And I apologize for not knowing this ahead of time, but was DJ in your mind as the soloist for the concerto, or did he come on afterwards?
Uh, then I decided, to write a rock and roll piece. I thought, well, it has to be guitar, then it has to be electric guitar, and then DJ had been a student long ago at the University of Michigan. He's also a fine composer as well, and he'd been a student there and had graduated since and gone on to a professional career. And I immediately thought of DJ because it's very hard to find electric guitarists who could read music. Most electric guitarists are playing rock music, and the music is not written down. So I knew that DJ would be the perfect person, and also I wanted somebody who could improvise a little bit, and I knew that he could do that too. So DJ was the perfect person to play the electric guitar part for this piece.
So DJ, when Michael got you involved, how did you hear about it, and what was your reaction to the whole idea?
Oh yeah, well, I think we talked about it at Midwest Composers, no, Midwest Band and Orchestra, the Midwest Clinic. We went to dinner, and Michael had mentioned that he was writing this piece, and if I was interested, and I was certainly interested. And it actually is the first time that like the worlds that I studied and like lived and loved and as in music all combined. Because as a young person, my whole thing was improvising and guitar, and then I studied jazz guitar at Baltimore School for the Arts, and then I studied classical guitar at Eastman, even though I was a composing major. And then at Michigan, I was playing like a lot of new music guitar, and of course, I love orchestra music. So it all kind of, this is the first one where it all kind of came together, and I was, I would have swum up the river to play this. So it's been a real gift to my life actually, because it got a lot of things going in the past it's been 7 years. I don't know, something like
It's been a
that.
while.
Things have
Yeah,
really opened up. It's been quite a treat actually to
yeah.
be able to play this. So.
And Neal, and you came into being because you were the guest conductor for the Alabama Symphony,
Right.
and that's how. And we all met because you were the conductor who conducted the world premiere
And
with the Alabama Symphony.
I actually came in last because the the concert was originally supposed to be conducted by someone else. I don't know who it was, but somewhere along the line they dropped out. I don't know why. But Kurt Long, who had been the executive director here at the Dayton Philharmonic and had moved on to be the executive director of the Alabama Symphony, called me and said, "Look, we're in a jam. We have this slightly off the wall concert coming up, and would you be interested in coming down?" And it was slightly off the wall because it was on a sort of alternative kind of series, and the idea was everything on this program would be connected in some way to rock and roll. There were several pieces of Michael's, which was natural because you grew up in rock and roll, and that influences all over your music. There was a piece, an orchestral piece, or actually an arranged orchestral piece of Frank Zappa's on the program. There was a movement of Philip Glass's Low Symphony based on music of David Bowie. And the centerpiece of this thing was the world premiere of Gee's Bend. And it was really one of the most fun programs I've done, and working on the piece and getting to know. I remember sitting down at the piano when I got the score and kind of banging my way through it, and I'm just banging and turning the pages, and like, this piece gets cooler and cooler as it goes. And it was really a fun experience to do, and so much fun that I immediately started thinking about, well, how do we bring this thing to Dayton? And that led us to the concert that we're hearing tonight.
And we should also mention that DJ came to my home studio, which I'm in right now in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and actually played through the piece and gave me ideas, and we kind of collaborated. And one of the big things was that you really can't notate the sound of the electric guitar. Just like organ, for example, the organist will pick the stops of the organ. That's part of the piece. So part of this work is the guitarist kind of comes up with the sound of the guitar, and what I would just do is put down like Jimi Hendrix like sound for this movement, Pat Metheny sound like for this movement, Chet Atkins sound for the last movement, and then DJ then would know how to come up with those sounds. Can you talk about all those boxes you have, DJ, and how you get all these different kind of sounds from the guitar?
Yeah, actually, before you go into it, let me interrupt a little bit, just sort of
Sure.
to set things for our audience, because the electric guitar, you think about like Les Paul figuring out how to amplify a guitar. That's one kind of electric guitar, a guitar which is being amplified. But what we have nowadays for electric guitars are really almost more like synthesizers, because you have just this amazing array of different sounds that you can get out of the instrument, not just an amplified sound of a guitar. And that's where we get into this stuff, which DJ will now explain to us.
Yeah. So, well, there's
Yeah.
Between the guitar and the amp and in other places, you can affect sound. So the easiest one that we all know is like the distorted sound, which is when the amp is turned up so loud that the guitar sounds distorted. And then you can add delay, where it like repeats what you do. You can add a chorus effect, which makes it sound like more guitars that are, like if you have one singer or you have 5 singers singing the same note, it sounds different. That's the chorus effect. And then wah wah pedal, which we wah, wah, wah. And then I have, and you can, if anyone watching this, there's some behind me, like this thing there, that can do anything in the world. I mean, I could play one note and then it could repeat different pitches that I tell it what to do and stuff. So it's sort of limitless. And I actually think of it kind of like an orchestra. I mean, you can play a note and then all these other things can go happen based on the articulation. And it is true that if you write something like, the certain guitarist sound, I mean, all the guitarists know it. All they do is spend their time, they go to Guitar Center every Saturday trying to find out how to sound like these recordings. So it's a part of the culture. So.
And it used to be, if you look at the old recordings of Jimi Hendrix playing in The Who, they would have these gigantic amplifiers behind them. And because of advances in technology now, these amplifiers that guitarists use and what DJ uses are small amplifiers, which can sit right next to them. And then they put a mic up to and they can put it through the PA system. Because you can imagine if you had a bunch of huge amplifiers behind the orchestra, you would have a lot of complaints because it would be much too loud. It'd be much too loud. But so it really was amazing how well the guitar can blend in, and really the electric guitar sounds really nice when it's playing softly, like in the second movement, Grandmother's Dream, where you can really make it sound very gentle and sweet, and it can really blend in a very nice way with the orchestra.
Yeah, one thing our listeners maybe can picture, depending on, it's been a long time since any of us have seen any live performances. But if you picture, if you're the sort of person who goes to rock performances, and in the future when you get to do that, watch the guitarist, and very often in between pieces you'll see the guitarist looking down at the ground and doing stuff with their feet, and that's because they have all these little boxes on the floor which control the different sounds, and they're programmed to get the particular sounds they want, and you just tap the appropriate sequence of buttons with your feet, and your guitar can change from sounding like Jimi Hendrix to sounding like Les Paul to sounding like something else. And so the next time you have a chance to go to a rock concert, soon I hope, watch the guitarist and see what goes on behind the scenes. Michael, in G's Bend, you mentioned Jimi Hendrix, you mentioned Pat Metheny. There are a variety of different sounds and sort of styles of, because this isn't just about, it is about G's Bend, and it's inspired by G's Bend, and it's about the electric guitar, but there's a whole sort of panoply of different electric guitar styles and traditions from American popular music that you reference in this piece. Can you tell us a little bit? I know personally that you have this wide-ranging and eclectic taste in popular music. So tell us a little bit about how you worked some of your favorite sounds into the piece.
I don't know. I wanted each movement to have a different kind of sound world. So I think that, to be honest with you, I actually composed the music first, and then I tried to figure out what kind of sound world for the guitar would best fit that. And so the first movement is a very hard-hitting kind of movement. So it really had to be, like the Jimi Hendrix kind of sound. Or DJ, who are some of the other guitarists like Hendrix of that particular time period from the 60s?
Oh, well, maybe something like Eric Clapton when he was in Cream. Was it Cream he was in?
Yeah,
or,
yeah,
Cream. Like, kind of like a overdriven. Yeah, I think it's like the Clapton and Hendrix, and there's all those blues guys that kind of turn things up. But Hendrix was really a unique sound, so that's what that movement specifically says Jimi Hendrix sound, and that's
right. Yeah.
And actually, you could just buy one of these boxes, and they scientists of super audio people have. You just pull up the one that says Hendrix, So,
yeah. And there's a game that people play called Guitar
Hero.
Guitar Hero, yeah.
Guitar Hero or something. So really, the beginning was dum bum, play these big major chords, and so it just seemed to be that particular sound. The Grandmother's Dream. I wanted to write something kind of very laid back and bluesy like, and kind of mysterious, kind of like a fog over the Mississippi near the river. I don't know, kind of feeling, and so can you describe the kind of sound we came up with that? You're playing like a melody, and it has a very mysterious kind of sound.
Yeah, so the way that I do that one, I'm actually looking at the part right now. The second movement description from you is Bill Frisell, Pat Metheny, warm, clean guitar sound with delay, phaser, and compression. So what that does is makes a really smooth sound that then has an echo. But one of my tricks is I use a volume pedal, so I'll articulate the note on the guitar and then fade the volume in, so you don't hear the articulation, but you hear a crescendo like the way a singer or maybe a horn or a bowed instrument could do. And that's one of the tricks for making it sound like it's singing.
And then what about the third movement? The third movement is a washboard. Right? Washboard, yeah. So which features the woodwinds, and then you're kind of playing like a plucking kind of boom,
yeah, it's
boom,
like
boom, boom, boom.
Plum is what you wrote, and it just says Southern blues guitar sound, and that's again the kind of amplifiers we use or whatever. That's not too, that's kind of just in the amps. It says no distortion, although I think I use a little teeny bit.
Yeah, so it's kind of it's more of a pure sound, like a Mississippi
Yeah.
Delta guitar
And
sound, like
that's like an accompanying blues kind of thing with no
yeah,
solos, just accompanying the winds. So,
yeah.
It's almost like a percussion type effect that the guitar is doing there, kind of
yeah.
rhythm.
yeah. I mean,
Rhythm.
you could do musicological, whatever the word is, study the guitar and all the different kind of
Right.
sounds. It's really quite extensive. The school of rock,
Yeah.
so to speak. And then we go to the last one, chicken picking, and the sounds seem to be Chet Atkins. A lot of people don't know about that school of Chet Atkins and chicken picking. Can you describe that for us?
Yeah, that's kind of like the concept there is that you're using a guitar pick and you're using your other fingers to create like kind of a twangy pluck thing, and you're getting a lot of notes going. And this one talks about Bo Diddley, Allman Brothers. So we have like the Bo Diddley kind of blues kind of stuff. And then
Yeah.
chicken picking's a whole thing. Like you can look up the amazing guitar. Just look it up. If you go YouTube chicken picking and maybe Glenn Campbell or something, like listen to, like you may not know, he's one of the most amazing guitarists. Like Eddie Van Halen once asked to take a guitar lesson with Glenn Campbell. It's like
Yeah.
so
I remember at the world premiere at the rehearsals when you go, okay, let's do the fourth movement, chicken picking, and the concert master looks up and goes, chicken picking.
Yeah. Well, I can handle those kind of people. I'm that really nice person, but since I'm married to a violist, I have a special relationship with the string section. So I'm always my wife is like, I'm like, the amp's not even louder than like the lawnmower next door. And she's like, it's too loud. So,
What's interesting is that there's a guitarist in Germany who was playing this 4 years ago. He played it quite a bit, and I went to hear the performance in Germany. It was amazing that just by these little descriptions that he, it was international. It wasn't just an American, that a European guitarist, electric guitarist, could actually, through looking at that description, come up with the sound that I was hoped for. So yeah.
I've been thinking about that a lot. Guitar strings, probably the most heard sound in music in the world, right? And you have bells and you have guitar strings.
And I know, and composers have tried to expand the orchestra using, going back to the, using electronic instruments like the Oda Martineau, Messiaen, and then people, and then using more percussion instruments, and then trying to bring guitar into the orchestra, or saxophones, another one. But there's always been great resistance with orchestras to include the saxophone and the guitar as part of the ensemble. Neal, why do you think that is?
Well, it's interesting because if you think about the orchestra in the mid to late 19th century, it was really a hub of innovation in that composers were writing for lots of new instruments. You had, instruments like, I mean, the English horn had been used in the Baroque era, but sort of coming into its own as its own instrument, the bass clarinet, the saxophone, there was a lot of invention going on, and composers, I think, were intrigued by these sounds. And then something happened around the turn of the century, and the orchestra kind of got fixed in this, large, we had three or four of everything, Mahler, Strauss kind of sound. And then there was this kind of reluctance to find new sounds. And I don't know what it was, because composers were certainly looking for new sounds and getting new sounds from the orchestra, but there wasn't a lot of push coming from composers, I think, to add instruments. Ravel brings saxophones in for bolero and stuff like that, but that's it. Um,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I don't know why it is, but and now of course there is more experimentation, and electronics are coming in, and various kinds of external media being brought in. So maybe we're in for a little bit of another thing, like what was going on in the Berlioz era, with lots of innovation. Hopefully.
I could speak to that a little bit. I mean, it is in my, okay, I'm like in the middle of my life, right? So in the past 20 years, well, hopefully, let's say the first third. The what's different between when I was an undergrad and when I go to some place like Dayton Philharmonic, your sound engineer was amazing, and there's training and people in every city that can like mic a guitar and make it sound good and blend it, and if you can communicate with them, they're very good at it, which maybe in 1950 would have been very hard. Now there are composers that write these big pieces that have all kinds of electronics, and they work their way through all of the regional orchestras. So they all, if you've done it once, they kind of know how to do it. You're like, oh, let's do the thing you do with this other composer, except we're just going to put a guitar mic instead of him be a DJ in the back or something. And it's actually made it really easy. And then the other problem is there are now more guitarists that can read. So, I mean, it's kind of a weird thing to say, but as Michael said, yeah. I mean, you're used to looking down at these pedals. You're not used to following, you know? So by the time you've gone to undergrad and you're also in chorus and you study jazz guitar, and if the composer gives you a part that looks like a film score or a big band chart, that any guitarist could play that. And there's got to be at least one in each city. So not yet, just bring me in, but soon there will be one in every city. So,
another instrument, accordion. So a couple of composers have tried to use the accordion, but I remember Christopher Rouse, one piece of his had an accordion. He said, I'll never do it again. They have to like search for hundreds of miles to find some accordion player who could read music.
Yeah. I have a great accordion in the orchestra story. There's a piece by well, now the late Michael Colgrass, called "A Letter from Mozart." I don't know if you know it. It's a really fun piece. It's the premise is that Michael gets a letter from Mozart, and it says, "Dear Michael, you may not know this, but you're my favorite composer." Sorry, Michael Daugherty. And Mozart says, I have this melody that's laying around that I never got to use it. Maybe you'd like to do something with it. So it's a set of variations on this Mozart style melody. And one of the variations has like an oompa band in it, which has accordion in the orchestra. And the very first time and the other weird thing about this piece is it has two conductors. So depending on where you are in the piece, your music either has a Roman numeral 1 or a Roman numeral 2, and that tells you which conductor you follow. It's crazy, but it's a lot of fun. Anyway, so my first gig when I was assistant conductor of the Oregon Symphony, I was the second conductor when Jimmy DePriest wanted to program this. And one of the bass players grew up playing accordion and still had it. So he still had his accordion from when he was a kid, and he played the accordion in the polka, the oompa band variation. And he calls his mother to tell her about it. And he says, "Mom, you wouldn't believe it. I'm playing accordion in the Oregon Symphony." And his mother says, "All the time?"
that's awesome.
And in the last big Mozart anniversary year, we did the piece here in Dayton. So I got to be the first conductor. And it was the same thing. It was one of the musicians, had an accordion laying around and still knew, it was an easy part. Who else has written for accordion? Oh, what's her name? Sofia Gubaidulina has lots of pieces for Bayan, the Russian button accordion. It's an important part of her sound. So maybe the accordion will have it. So Michael, I had a question that interests me. I hope it'll interest our audience. You have written a fair number of concertos for different instruments. I mean, electric guitar is one example, but there's flute and piano, cello. But many of those concertos, and I might be maybe even all of them, they tend not to be, concerto for flute. You have a title and you have a story. Like the cello concerto you wrote recently was inspired by Hemingway. And so how does that work in your mind? Does the notion of concerto for bassoon not interest you as much as a piece of music which would also be a concerto for bassoon? You know what I mean?
Well, in my music, I want to reach across the aisle, so to speak, and so it's another element, another artistic element into the piece where there's a story behind the piece. and also it also helps me compose the piece because it gives me an emotional to compose the piece.
And I know from talking to you that you also, well, of course, things are a little different now, I suppose, that you love to travel.
Yes,
And so, for instance, did you actually go to Boykin, Alabama, and go to Gee's Bend when you were writing the piece?
I
Did you
did.
did you go did you
Yep,
go to Key West for the Hemingway piece? Is that
I
part of?
did. Yeah.
Yeah, genius.
So I'll quickly tell the G's, but I flew to Montgomery, Alabama, which is the capital. I rented a car and I drove around 3 hours south in the backwoods of of Alabama to Boykin, which is a tiny little village. And I don't know, there's maybe 20 little houses there, and then there's a kind of a small building where the women go, and that's where they actually make the quilts, and they have some hanging up, and they do sell them. But it's like a quilting bee. They'll go, and it's not sometimes not just one woman; it's a group of women who will be working on a quilt as a quilting bee, and these women actually live there. And right next to it is a river, and that river, because of the racial dynamics of the Jim Crow era, that river was blocked off. So those people were isolated. They could not. There was no ferry to get across the river, and that was intended to keep that area under control and isolated. It wasn't until I believe maybe in the 1960s or 70s that a ferry actually was brought back, so people could easily get back and forth between the two states. But it's a very, very small town, kind of a hamlet, I guess is really the word. And I remember driving for 3 hours in the backwoods to reach the town, and then I actually talked to some of the women, and yeah, it just gives me an emotional framework and reason to compose the piece. I guess it makes it more authentic in a way.
And one other thing about the piece which we hadn't mentioned, you mentioned the quilting bees, and the quilts, of course, are the things that the women of Gee's Bend are probably the most famous for. But the other thing they're famous for is music and singing, and the spirituals that they sing, and the style that they sing it. There's some amazing recordings out there of the women of Gee's Bend singing spirituals. And of course, in the chicken picking movement is not just a chicken picking movement, it's also a spirituals movement, because you have several, you have Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, and Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen. I think several spirituals get woven into that fabric. Did you hear any of their singing when you were there, or was it something that you heard later through recordings?
Well, I just knew about the recordings, but I've been to African American churches over the years, and I've even had some students at the University of Michigan who went on to successful careers. Uh, African American composers went on to successful careers writing gospel music. But I grew up singing those two hymns, that they're songs that you mentioned about. Uh, so quoting is always a tricky thing. I felt that because I grew up singing those two songs, "Sweet Low Suturia" and "Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen." I grew up singing those songs as a kid, and so I just thought it would also. It's kind of like if you're shooting a film, the costumes are very important. The costumes kind of put you in a time and place. So by quoting those two hymns, they're interwoven with the chicken picking melody. So I tried to be clever about it, but it's just like it gives it an authentic kind of feeling to it. It kind of brings us into that particular time period and that particular culture.
So I'm going to ask this question, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, DJ, and you can pivot away and spin it however you want. You can be a politician and answer the question you want to answer instead.
Fun.
But because you're a composer and a performer, what's it like when you're in a situation like you were with G's Bend? A new piece written by someone you know, you're there as the soloist. Do you just turn your composer mind off, or because of the collaborative nature of you and Michael working together on the sounds, do you also think of as a composer, and how can you take the notes on the page, and how do you work that as someone
Oh,
in both
yeah.
roles?
Well, I think they both inform each other. Well, reading this book about Ted Templeman, the producer, one of the reasons why he's such a great producer is that he understands what it's like to be on the other side of the glass. So, I mean, really, as a guitarist, I grew up playing other people's music. And as a composer, I'm always hoping people do a good job. And then as a performer, I'm always hoping the composer does a good job. And since this guitar part is so well written, it's very easy to just go right into the composing part, or, pardon me, the guitar playing part. What's frustrating as a composer guitarist is when someone sends me a part that they didn't heavily vet to make sure it can be played before it gets to me. Because then at that point, I become like a composition teacher for the other person, which is fine because I'm a fan of people having more guitar parts. But this one fits into the fingers very easily. And while it's virtuosic, there's nothing, I mean, it's virtuosic because I practiced doing that stuff since I was 10 years old, so that's the virtuosity, not some kind of weird finger position that you have to practice yoga to do. And then as a composer, I'm happy to observe the process. So that's where I learn from my own stuff to be in, like when I was a student, I read that Stravinsky would take scores to rehearsals and make big circles on the pages he liked. So when I was in Michigan, I would sit in on the orchestra rehearsals and take a score and just circle like the measures that sounded good. And so as someone that can play, it's inspiring. But I'm pretty good at turning on what Steve Vai says, your inner rock god knows only one thing, and that's confidence. So I'm pretty good like turning on the button to pretend I'm I always wanted to play for thousands of people. So finally, age aside, I now can play for thousands of people. And what's the difference between 70 and 15? It's still a human person that is engaged in that moment. So it's awesome.
Well, it's very important if you're going to be a guitar soloist to have great hair.
Oh yeah.
And DJ, and you have that.
DJ has that.
Actually, yeah, I started. If you look for anybody, I mean, no one would ever look, but I mean, if you see this piece at the beginning, my hair was very short. And then I was like, oh, I still have hair. And I'm like, getting there. So I should grow the hair out so it flies around and stuff.
So one last question I'd like to ask both of you, because you're both composers and you don't have to reveal anything that's top secret, but I'm just curious, what are you writing these days, and has it been informed at all by the experience we've had these past 10 months, or are you just focused on whatever path you were on?
I'll tell you, the piece I'm writing, I'm collaborating with a woman who's an African-American singer, and she's the head of the music department at Spelman College, which is a historically Black college. And I'm the father of an African-American boy. And I'm collaborating with a principal in the education field that is an African-American man. And he has over like 100 YouTube videos, and he goes around to conferences, and it's all about how to raise boys. That's his whole mission, is like, what do we do with young men, and how do we inspire them, and how do we engage them? And he has given the two of us permission to take any text from his videos and turn it into a song cycle. Since the singer Maria Clark is a parent of a boy about age 7, and my son is going to be 4, this is a real common issue that we're really interested in, and I'm just going to drive my bus right at issues in America right now. So yeah, I think it's informed by a lot of things that happened this past summer.
Cool.
Yeah.
And Michael, what are you working on?
Well, let's see. I've written actually written 4 pieces in the last year and a half, because I have nowhere to go and nothing to distract me.
What else are you gonna do?
Yeah.
So usually I'm late. Like I think of the G-Spin, didn't you get the score like 3 weeks before or 2 weeks before or something? I'm usually like pushing the deadlines right up to the point. Now I'm going to actually be done a year ahead.
Wow.
So that's really good. But just some of the subject matters, I wrote a violin concerto inspired by Amelia Earhart's Last Flight. I wrote an orchestra piece. Let's see, that's for the National Symphony. I wrote an orchestra piece for the Pittsburgh Symphony for their 100th something anniversary, inspired by Andy Warhol because he's from Pittsburgh. And then I just finished a piece here actually last night. That's why I was late getting here. I finished a piece inspired by the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake, Iowa, where Buddy Holly played his last concert in 1959. Before then, he then chartered a plane and was killed with Richie Valens and the Big Bopper right after that. And I'm from Iowa, and I've been to the Surf Ballroom, which is still there in Clear Lake, Iowa. It's a tiny little town way up in northern Iowa. So I wrote a piece called "Last Dance at the Surf." I think you're gonna like this piece, Neal.
That sounds
It's
good.
yeah, a lot of fun writing. Yeah. So there's nothing to do. So I think composers are writing a lot, these days. We should mention that we've created a recording of this piece. We recorded it a number of years ago with Dayton, and now we're finally getting the editing done and so forth. And this is the cover image.
Oh.
And I was in Austin, Texas, and there was this artist who had made this image of a guitar, which kind of fits into the G's band, kind of folk art. So
Yeah, it has that sort of
image.
quilty thing going on.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the image of because it features works for guitar and orchestra. So there you go.
I'm gonna hang that on the wall right back there. That's good. That's really awesome looking.
Yeah, it's cool image. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have two other works besides the G's band for electric guitar and orchestra, with which DJ Sparr is a soloist for that piece. We have a piece for acoustic guitar called Bay of Pigs, and that's for acoustic guitar and string orchestra. And Neal, our guitarist for that, his name is, which is difficult for me to pronounce,
Manuel Barueco.
He's a phenomenal guitarist, and of course, playing acoustic guitar is very different from electric guitar. What's the difference between the way you play an acoustic guitar and electric guitar? I'm curious.
Okay, so first of all, Manuel Barueco is one of my role models going back. So this is very exciting to be on the same album. But he would play classical style or flamenco style, and that means you have a very finely manicured fingernails, and you pluck nylon strings, whereas what I play with is like a guitar pick that you buy at the guitar store. Yeah, that's the main. And there's all kinds of insanity that goes with doing all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But not only do you play a guitar pick and buy it at the guitar store, afterwards you can fling it into the audience, which a classical guitarist cannot fling they don't want to be flinging their fingernails into the audience. So that's
I have played some concerts. I wonder if we could do that during G's band. It would have to be the right. Well, one time I played it at a late night show with New World Symphony, and I did get a moment of rock star like thing because it was a pretty fun crowd. But that would be pretty funny. Just chuck that out. It's one of your board members or something.
right. And Michael, do you want to say a little bit about Troy Jam also?
Yeah, and Troy Jam. So kind of the connection is Achilles played the lyre. So and Troy Jam is about the Trojan War, except that the text for this was written by a very eminent poet, Anne Carson, who was famous for her translations of Greek and Sappho and so forth, and very fascinating person, a very offbeat kind of way of looking at Greek history, and so what she did is made a version of the Trojan War where actually instead of fighting each other and having a war, they actually have a jam session and play instruments of the orchestra. So we have a narrator who then recites the libretto, I guess you would call it, of Anne Carson, and then I wrote an orchestra piece. It's kind of a guide to the orchestra, because we hear all the instruments of the orchestra in this retelling of the Trojan War, where instead of making war, the musicians of the orchestra make peace.
Yeah, it's a little bit like Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra meets the Iliad, and you have this wonderful result, which is really just great fun. And as you say, it ends with the sound of the harp. So the theme of the three pieces on the CD is the plucked strings of the electric guitar and the acoustic guitar and the harp, and it's a lovely combination. And be very excited when it comes out. Well, Michael Daugherty, composer, and DJ Sparr, composer and electric guitar soloist, thank you so much for joining me in this discussion, which we'll use for concert night with the Dayton Philharmonic. And it was really interesting. I'm sure when the CD comes out, we'll also make use of this video to help promote it, because it's a really interesting, it's an interesting discussion about some really cool music.